They threw her out at dawn, with nothing but the clothes on her back and the brand still burning on her wrist. Ivy stumbled through the pack gates, her vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. Behind her, the jeers and laughter of the wolves she had grown up with echoed across the frost-covered ground. 23 years she had lived among them. 23 years of cooking their meals, mending their clothes, scrubbing their floors on hands and knees. And in the end, none of it had mattered. Unwanted. The word had been seared into her skin with a hot iron, the pack's final judgment made permanent in raised pink flesh. It was the mark given to wolves deemed unworthy of belonging, those too weak, too broken, too useless to deserve a place among their kind. She had seen it given to criminals and cowards, to the mad and the dying. She had never imagined it would be given to her. Her crime was simple. She had refused to mate. The Alpha's son had wanted her. Not for love, not for the bond, but for the particular pleasure of breaking something no one else valued. He had cornered her in the kitchen 3 nights ago, his hands rough and demanding, his breath hot against her ear as he told her exactly what he planned to do. And Ivy, fool that she was, had fought back. She had grabbed the nearest pot of boiling water and thrown it in his face. The screams had brought the whole pack running. But when they saw their Alpha's heir clutching his burned skin, howling in agony, they did not see a would-be victim defending herself. They saw a servant who had dared to raise her hand against her betters. The trial had lasted less than an hour. The branding had happened that same night. Now she walked alone down the mountain road, her wrist throbbing with every heartbeat, her future stretching before her like an open grave. Banished wolves did not survive long, without a pack, without territory, without anyone to watch your back while you slept. The world was full of dangers that would swallow you whole. She would be dead within a week. Everyone knew it. That was the point. The forest pressed close on either side of the road, bare branches reaching toward a sky the color of old bruises. Ivy walked until her legs ached, then walked some more. She had nowhere to go, but standing still felt too much like giving up, and she was not ready to give up yet. Not while her heart still beat. Not while breath still moved through her lungs. She was so focused on putting one foot in front of the other that she did not hear the horses until they were almost upon her. The thunder of hooves made her spin around, her heart lurching into her throat. A company of riders crested the hill behind her, at least a dozen strong, their horses gleaming with sweat despite the cold. They wore black leather armor marked with a crest she did not recognize, a silver wolf beneath a crown of stars. At their head rode a man who made her breath catch for reasons she could not name. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell past his jaw and a face that looked carved from granite. His eyes were the color of smoke, pale and piercing, and they fixed on her with an intensity that made her want to run. Power radiated from him like heat from a fire, pressing against her skin, making her wolf, quiet and dormant for so many years, suddenly stir to life inside her chest. The company slowed as they approached, and the dark-haired man raised his hand to halt them entirely. He stared down at Ivy from his horse, something unreadable flickering across his harsh features. "You bear the brand of the unwanted," he said, his voice deep and rough. It was not a question. Ivy lifted her chin, refusing to cower. "I do? What was your crime?" "I defended myself against a man who would have forced himself on me." The words came out steady, though her hands shook at her sides. Apparently that is unforgivable. Silence stretched between them. The other riders exchanged glances, but the dark-haired man did not look away from her face. His nostrils flared slightly, and something shifted in those smoke-colored eyes. Something hungry, something stunned. "What is your name?" he asked, and his voice had changed. Softer now, almost reverent. "Ivy, Ivy Thorne." The man swung down from his horse in one fluid motion, landing before her with a grace that belied his size. Up close, he was even more imposing, towering over her by nearly a foot. But he did not touch her. He simply stood there, staring at her like she was something impossible. "I am Draven Ashford," he said quietly, "Alpha King of the Northern Territories." His jaw tightened, and when he spoke again, his voice carried to every rider in his company. "And you, Ivy Thorn, are my mate." The world tilted beneath her feet. Ivy took a step backward, her heart slamming against her ribs. That is not possible. And yet it is true. Draven's voice was calm, but there was a tension in his body that betrayed him, the rigid set of his shoulders, the way his hands had curled into fists at his sides. "My wolf recognized you the moment I saw you. The bond does not lie." "Your wolf is mistaken." Ivy's voice came out sharper than she intended, edged with panic. "I am no one, less than no one. I am branded, banished. I have nothing to offer an alpha, let alone a king." "You think that matters to me?" Something flickered in those smoke-colored eyes. "The bond chose you. That makes you more valuable than every noble in my kingdom combined." The riders behind him had gone utterly still, their faces a mixture of shock and fascination. Ivy could feel their stares pressing against her skin, judging, calculating. A banished Omega claimed by the Alpha King. It was the kind of story that would spread like wildfire, growing wilder with each retelling. "I did not ask to be chosen," she said, "and I do not know you. How can I trust that you are any different from the wolves who did this to me?" She held up her branded wrist, the ugly mark stark against her pale skin. "How do I know you will not hurt me the same way they tried to?" Draven's expression shifted, something dark and dangerous passing through his eyes. But it was not directed at her. It was directed at the mark on her wrist, at the pack that had put it there. When he spoke again, his voice was low and lethal. "The wolf who touched you," he said. "The one you defended yourself against. Give me his name." Ivy hesitated. "Why?" "Because I am going to kill him." The words were spoken without heat, without drama. They were simple and factual, a statement of intent that left no room for argument. Ivy stared at this man, this king, and felt something shift in her chest. No one had ever offered to fight for her before. No one had ever looked at her wounds and responded with rage on her behalf. "His name is Caden," she said quietly. "Caden Marsh, the Alpha's son. Then Caden Marsh will die." Draven extended his hand toward her, palm up, an invitation rather than a demand. "Come with me, Ivy. Let me take you somewhere safe. Let me prove that not all wolves are like the ones who hurt you." She should refuse. Everything she had learned in her 23 years of life told her that powerful men were not to be trusted, that kindness always came with strings attached, that hope was just another word for disappointment waiting to happen. But her wolf was howling inside her chest, straining toward him with a desperation she had never felt before, and she was so tired of being alone. Ivy placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong, and something sparked between them, a jolt of connection that ran up her arm and settled deep in her bones. Draven's breath caught, and for just a moment his composure cracked. She saw wonder in his eyes, and relief, and something that looked almost like fear. "Thank you," he murmured, so quietly that only she could hear. "I know this is not what you expected. I know you have no reason to trust me. But I swear to you, Ivy Thorn, I will spend every day earning the faith you have shown by taking my hand." Before she could respond, he turned and lifted her onto his horse as if she weighed nothing at all. He swung up behind her a moment later, his chest warm against her back, his arms caging her as he took the reins. The intimacy of the position made her face flush, but she forced herself not to pull away. "To the castle," Draven commanded, and the company surged forward. They rode for hours through forests and across frozen rivers, stopping only to water the horses. Ivy said little, too overwhelmed by the day's events to make conversation, but she was acutely aware of Draven's presence behind her, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the occasional brush of his jaw against her hair, the way his arm tightened around her waist whenever the terrain grew rough. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, the castle came into view. It rose from the mountains like something out of a dream, all soaring towers and dark stone walls, banners snapping in the evening wind. Ivy had never seen anything so grand. Her old Pax territory had been modest at best, a collection of timber buildings clustered around a central hall. This was a kingdom. This was power made manifest in stone and steel. "Welcome to Ashford Keep," Draven said against her ear. "Your new home." Ivy's throat tightened. She had never had a home, not really. She had had a place where she slept and worked and survived, but never somewhere she truly belonged. The idea that this impossible fortress could be hers was too large to comprehend. "I do not know how to be what you need," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Draven's arm tightened around her waist. "You already are what I need. The rest, we will learn together." The gates swung open before them, and Ivy rode into her new life with the Alpha King's warmth at her back, and his promise echoing in her heart. The first week in Ashford Keep passed in a blur of new faces and overwhelming luxury. Ivy had been given chambers larger than the entire servants' quarters she had shared with 12 other wolves back home. A massive bed dominated one wall, draped in furs and silks she was afraid to touch. Windows stretched from floor to ceiling, offering views of snow-capped mountains that stole her breath each morning. And there were servants, servants who bowed to her, who called her "my lady," who looked at her like she was someone who mattered. She did not know what to do with any of it. The brand on her wrist had begun to heal, but she kept it covered with a leather cuff that Draven had given her on the second day. He had not made a ceremony of it, simply pressed it into her hand and told her she never had to show the mark unless she chose to. It was a small kindness, but it had made her eyes burn with tears she refused to shed. She saw him every day, though their interactions were brief. He would appear at breakfast, asking about her comfort, her needs, whether anyone had treated her poorly. He would check on her in the evenings, sometimes sharing a meal with her in her chambers when his duties allowed. He never pushed, never demanded, never made her feel like she owed him anything for the shelter he had provided. He simply waited, as if he had all the time in the world and was content to let her set the pace. It was maddening and terrifying. And slowly, despite her best efforts, it was wearing down her walls. On the seventh night, Ivy found herself unable to sleep. The castle was too quiet, too empty, too different from the cramped chaos she had known her whole life. She pulled a robe over her nightgown and slipped into the corridor, intending to walk until exhaustion claimed her. She did not expect to find Draven standing on the battlements, alone in the moonlight. He stood with his back to her, his hands braced against the stone wall, his dark hair loose around his shoulders. He had shed his formal attire for a simple shirt and trousers, and without the trappings of kingship, he looked younger somehow, more vulnerable. The moonlight caught the sharp planes of his face as he turned at her approach, and something in his expression made her heart clench. "You should be asleep," he said, but there was no reproach in his voice. "So should you." Ivy moved to stand beside him, looking out over the darkened kingdom. "What troubles the Alpha King at this hour?" Draven was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was rougher than she had ever heard it. "My mother died on a night like this, cold and clear, with the moon full overhead. I was 12 years old." Ivy's breath caught. She had not expected him to share something so personal, so raw. "I am sorry. She was killed by wolves from a rival pack. They came in the night, slipped past our guards, and slit her throat while she slept. His hands tightened on the stone. My father never recovered. He spent the rest of his life hunting down everyone responsible, and when the last one was dead, he simply stopped. Stopped eating, stopped sleeping, stopped living. He died 6 months later. They said it was grief, but I know the truth. He chose to follow her. Ivy did not know what to say. She understood loss. Her own mother had died when she was young, leaving her to the mercy of a pack that saw her as nothing but labor. But this was different. This was a wound that ran so deep it had shaped the man standing beside her. "That is why you swore to kill Caden," she said softly. "Why you reacted so strongly to what was done to me. I have spent my entire life protecting the wolves under my care." Draven finally looked at her, and the pain in his smoke-colored eyes stole her breath. "I swore I would never let anyone suffer the way my mother did, the way my father did, and then I found you on that road, branded and broken and still standing despite everything they had done to you." His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "You were the bravest thing I had ever seen." Ivy felt tears prick at her eyes. I was terrified. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is moving forward despite it. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she did not, his fingers brushed against her cheek with a gentleness that made her ache. "You survived, Ivy. You refused to let them destroy you. That is worth more than any title or bloodline." She leaned into his touch without meaning to, her eyes fluttering closed. The mate bond hummed between them, warm and steady, and for the first time since she had been cast out, she did not feel alone. "I am still afraid," she admitted, "of this place, of these people, of what I am supposed to become. But I am not afraid of you. Not anymore." Draven's thumb traced the line of her jaw, and when she opened her eyes, she found him looking at her like she was something precious, something worth protecting. "That is a start," he said quietly. "That is more than enough." They stood together on the battlements until the moon began to set, two wounded souls learning that healing did not have to happen alone. After that night, something shifted between them. Draven began appearing at unexpected moments, in the library where Ivy had taken to hiding when the castle felt too large, in the gardens where she walked to clear her head, in the kitchen where she sometimes helped the cooks out of old habit. He never announced himself, never demanded her attention. He simply appeared, and somehow his presence made every space feel safer. He discovered that she could not read on a rainy afternoon, when she was staring at a book of poetry with frustration creasing her brow. She had expected mockery, or at the very least, pity. Instead, he had pulled a chair beside hers and asked if she wanted to learn. Now they spent an hour together each evening, their heads bent over books while Draven guided her through letters and sounds, with a patience that continually surprised her. His voice was low and steady as he pronounced each word, his finger tracing the lines so she could follow along. Sometimes their hands would brush, and Ivy would feel that spark of connection race up her arm. Sometimes she would catch him watching her with an expression that made her stomach flutter. "You are a quick learner," he said one evening, 3 weeks into their lessons. They sat in his private study, a fire crackling in the hearth, rain pattering against the windows. "Faster than I was at your age." "I doubt that very much." Ivy traced her finger over the word she had just sounded out, home, and felt something warm bloom in her chest. "You were probably reading before you could walk." "I was a terror as a child, actually. Refused to sit still for lessons. My mother used to bribe me with honey cakes." A shadow of sadness crossed his face at the memory, but it was softer now than before. Less like an open wound, and more like an old scar, tender but healing. Ivy reached out without thinking and laid her hand over his. "She sounds wonderful." She was. Draven turned his hand over, his fingers interlacing with hers. She would have liked you, I think. She always said she could measure a person's worth by how they treated those who could offer them nothing in return. His thumb brushed across her knuckles. You spent your life serving wolves who gave you nothing but cruelty, and yet you remained kind. That is rare, Ivy. Rarer than you know. Heat crept up her cheeks, and she ducked her head to hide it. I do not feel kind. I feel angry most days, at what they did to me, at what I let them do for so long. Anger is not the opposite of kindness. It is the proof of it. Draven lifted her chin gently, forcing her to meet his eyes. You are angry because you know you deserved better, because somewhere inside you, despite everything, you still believe you are worth more than the way they treated you. His voice dropped lower. And you are. You are worth more than all of them combined. Ivy's heart was pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. No one had ever spoken to her like this, like she mattered, like her pain was valid, like her anger was something to honor rather than suppress. She wanted to look away, to hide from the intensity of his gaze, but she could not make herself move. Why do you say things like that? She whispered. Why do you look at me like... Like what? Like I am something precious. The word felt inadequate, but she did not have a better one. I am nobody, a banished servant with a brand on her wrist. I have nothing to offer you. Draven's expression shifted, something fierce and tender warring in his smoke-colored eyes. You are my mate, Ivy, the other half of my soul. I have waited 32 years to find you, and I would have waited 32 more. He released her chin, but only to cup her face in both hands, cradling her like she was something that might break. You ask what you have to offer me. The answer is everything. Your strength, your resilience, your kindness despite the cruelty you have endured. You make me want to be better than I am. You make me want to be worthy of the bond we share. Tears slipped down her cheeks before she could stop them. Draven brushed them away with his thumbs, his touch impossibly gentle for hands that had killed in battle. I do not know how to do this, Ivy admitted, her voice breaking. I do not know how to trust or hope or believe that this is real. Then let me show you. He pressed his forehead against hers, their breath mingling in the small space between them. One day at a time, one moment at a time, until you believe it as deeply as I do. Ivy closed her eyes and let herself lean into him, let herself accept the comfort he offered without question or condition. The mate bond pulsed between them like a living thing, warm and bright and undeniable. And somewhere in the quiet of that fire-lit room, with rain falling outside and his hands gentle on her face, she realized that she was falling in love with him. It was the most terrifying thing she had ever felt, and the most wonderful. The night of the winter solstice brought the first celebration Ivy had ever attended as a guest rather than a servant. The great hall blazed with light, hundreds of candles flickering from iron chandeliers and casting warm shadows across stone walls hung with evergreen boughs. Nobles filled the space in their finest silks and furs, laughing and dancing and drinking wine from golden goblets. Music swelled from the corner where a small group of musicians played, the melody bright and joyful in a way that made Ivy's chest ache. She stood at the edge of the room, dressed in a gown of deep green velvet that Draven had commissioned for her. It was the finest thing she had ever worn, fitted perfectly to her frame, the sleeves long enough to cover the brand on her wrist. She should have felt beautiful. Instead, she felt like an imposter, waiting to be discovered and thrown out into the cold where she belonged. You look like you are planning an escape. Ivy turned to find Draven beside her, impossibly handsome in black formal attire, his dark hair pulled back from his face. The sight of him made her pulse quicken in a way she still was not used to. I am considering it, she admitted. These people, they keep staring at me, whispering. They are curious. Draven moved closer, his shoulder brushing hers. You are the mystery mate their king brought home from the road. They will whisper for a while, and then they will find something else to talk about. His voice dropped lower. And if any of them dare to disrespect you, I will have them removed from court. Permanently. A startled laugh escaped her. You cannot exile everyone who whispers about me. Watch me. She looked up at him, expecting to find humor in his expression, but his smoke-colored eyes were entirely serious. This man, this king, would burn his court to the ground for her if she asked. The realization sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cold. Dance with me, Draven said, extending his hand. I do not know how to dance. Then I will teach you. That is what we do, is it not? I teach you things, and you pretend to find me tolerable. Ivy bit her lip to hide her smile. I do more than tolerate you. Something flickered in his eyes. Hope, hunger, a vulnerability he rarely let show. Then dance with me, Ivy. Let me show them all what I already know. And what is that? That you belong here. He took her hand, not waiting for her answer. That you belong with me. She let him lead her onto the floor, acutely aware of every eye in the room following their movement. But once Draven's arms came around her, once they began to move together in slow, sweeping turns, the rest of the world seemed to fade away. He guided her with patient hands, adjusting her steps when she stumbled, holding her close when she grew uncertain. You are doing well, he murmured against her hair. I am stepping on your feet. I have endured worse. His hand pressed more firmly against the small of her back, drawing her closer until there was barely any space between them. Besides, this gives me an excuse to hold you. Ivy's breath caught. She looked up and found his face mere inches from hers, his eyes dark with an emotion that made her stomach flip. The music faded to a distant hum. The watching nobles disappeared entirely. There was only Draven, his warmth, his scent, the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. Ivy. Her name was a prayer on his lips. I want to kiss you. I have wanted to since the moment I first saw you on that road. But I will not. Not unless you want it too. Her answer came without thought, without hesitation, rising from somewhere deep and instinctive that had nothing to do with logic. Yes. Draven kissed her like she was the air he needed to breathe. His mouth claimed hers with a tenderness that made her knees weak, one hand cradling the back of her head while the other held her firmly against him. Ivy melted into the kiss, her fingers curling into the fabric of his coat, a small sound escaping her throat that she could not have stopped if she tried. The mate bond flared between them, bright and golden and overwhelming, flooding her with sensation until she could not tell where she ended and he began. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ivy became aware of the silence that had fallen over the hall. Every eye was fixed on them. Every mouth had stopped mid-conversation. The Alpha King had just kissed his mate in front of the entire court, and there was no taking it back. Draven did not seem to care. He looked down at her with eyes that burned like embers, his thumb tracing her lower lip. Let them stare, he said, his voice rough. Let them see exactly how I feel about you. I am done hiding it. Ivy laughed, breathless and giddy in a way she had never been before. You are going to scandalize your entire kingdom. Good. He kissed her again, softer this time, a promise rather than a declaration. They could use some excitement. The music started up again, and this time, when they danced, Ivy did not feel like an imposter anymore. She felt like a queen, his queen, and for the first time in her life, she believed she deserved to be. The happiness lasted exactly 3 days. Ivy was in the library, practicing her letters at the desk by the window, when the doors burst open and a woman swept inside like a storm made flesh. She was tall and striking, with hair the color of burnished copper and eyes like chips of green ice. Her gown was cut low and tight, emphasizing curves that Ivy could never hope to match, and her face was arranged in an expression of perfectly polished fury. "So you are the little stray my betrothed has taken in," the woman said, looking Ivy up and down with undisguised contempt. "I expected something more impressive." Ivy rose slowly from her chair, her heart beginning to pound. "I do not know who you are." "Of course you do not. Why would the king bother to tell his pet about the woman he was supposed to marry?" The stranger smiled, and it was a cruel, cutting thing. "I am Lady Rowena of House Vance. Draven and I have been promised to each other since we were children. Our union was meant to solidify the alliance between our families." She stepped closer, her perfume cloying and thick. "And then you came along. Betrothed." The word hit Ivy like a blow to the chest. Draven had never mentioned a betrothal. He had never mentioned anyone waiting for him, expecting to become his queen. Had it slipped his mind, or had he deliberately kept it from her? "Draven found his mate," Ivy said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "The bond supersedes any political arrangement." "Does it?" Rowena laughed, a sharp and brittle sound. "How convenient for you. A branded exile, claiming a mate bond with the most powerful alpha in the North. Some might call that opportunistic." She tilted her head, studying Ivy like a predator sizing up prey. "Some might call it fraud." "I did not choose this." "No, you simply stumbled into it. A happy accident that just happened to save you from dying alone in the wilderness." Rowena's smile sharpened. "I have seen your type before, little Omega. Desperate creatures who latch onto power wherever they can find it. But Draven will tire of you eventually. He always does. And when he casts you aside, I will be here to pick up the pieces." The door opened again before Ivy could respond, and Draven strode in with thunder in his expression. His smoke-colored eyes swept from Rowena to Ivy, taking in the scene in an instant, and his jaw tightened with barely contained fury. "Rowena!" His voice could have frozen fire. "You were not invited to my castle." "I invited myself." Rowena turned to face him, her demeanor shifting from predator to purring kitten in the space of a heartbeat. "Someone had to come check on you, darling. The rumors are quite alarming. They say you have taken a branded criminal as your mate." "She is not a criminal. She is a survivor." Draven moved to stand beside Ivy, his hand finding the small of her back in a gesture of unmistakable possession. "And she is my mate. My true mate, chosen by the bond, not by political convenience." "The bond," Rowena's lip curled. "A pretty story, but bonds can be faked, Draven. You of all people should know that." Something flickered in Draven's expression, a shadow of doubt, quickly suppressed, but not quickly enough. Ivy felt the ground shift beneath her feet. There was history here, something painful that Rowena knew how to exploit. Before anyone could speak again, a guard appeared in the doorway, his face pale with urgency. "Your Majesty, forgive the interruption, but there is a delegation at the gates. Alpha Marcus Marsh of the Southern Pack. He demands an audience." Ivy's blood turned to ice. Marcus Marsh, Caden's father, the Alpha who had branded her and cast her out. "He claims the woman you have taken is his pack's property," the guard continued, his voice strained. "He says she is a thief and a criminal who must be returned to face justice. He has brought 50 warriors and threatens war if you refuse." The room fell silent. Rowena's smile had returned, sharp and satisfied, as if this was exactly what she had been waiting for. Draven's hand tightened on Ivy's back. When he spoke, his voice was calm, but there was steel beneath the surface that promised violence. "Tell Alpha Marsh that he may wait in the courtyard until I am ready to receive him, and tell him that if a single one of his wolves sets foot inside my castle walls, I will consider it an act of war and respond accordingly." The guard bowed and fled. Rowena excused herself with a curtsy that dripped false sweetness, and Ivy stood frozen beside the man who had saved her, feeling the weight of her past closing in like a noose. "Draven," she whispered, "if he has come with warriors, if he means to fight, then we will fight." Draven turned to face her, cupping her face in his hands the way he always did when he wanted her full attention. "I told you once that I would kill the wolf who hurt you. That promise stands. Marcus Marsh will not take you from me. No one will." Ivy wanted to believe him, but as the distant shouts of warriors echoed from the courtyard below, she could not shake the feeling that everything she had found, this happiness, this hope, this love, was about to be ripped away. The confrontation took place in the Great Hall. Alpha Marcus Marsh stood at the center of the room, flanked by two of his largest warriors. He was an older man, silver threading through his dark hair, but his body was still powerful, and his eyes held the cold cunning of a predator who had held power for decades. Behind him, visible through the open doors, his army waited in the courtyard like wolves circling wounded prey. Ivy stood beside Draven's throne, her hands clasped to hide their trembling. Rowena had positioned herself on the opposite side of the room, watching the proceedings with barely concealed delight. "You harbor a criminal, Alpha King." Marcus's voice echoed through the hall. "A servant who assaulted my son and heir, leaving him scarred for life. By the laws of our kind, she belongs to me. I demand her return." "Your son attempted to force himself on her," Draven replied, his voice deadly calm. "She defended herself. That is not a crime in my kingdom. In your kingdom, perhaps. But she committed her offense in mine." Marcus smiled, a thin and reptilian expression. "The law is clear. Crimes are punished by the pack where they occurred. You have no authority to shield her from my justice." Murmurs rippled through the assembled nobles. Ivy felt their eyes on her, weighing, judging. Some looked sympathetic. Others looked at her like she was a problem that needed to be solved. "She is my mate," Draven said. "That supersedes your claims." "Does it?" Marcus tilted his head. "I see no mating mark on her neck. I see no formal ceremony binding her to you. All I see is a king who has become infatuated with a pretty face and forgotten his responsibilities." His gaze slid to Rowena. "There are those who remember the alliance you were meant to honor, the betrothal you abandoned for this branded exile." Draven's hands tightened on the arms of his throne. "The betrothal was dissolved the moment I found my true mate." "So you say. But some might wonder if this so-called bond is genuine at all." Marcus stepped closer, his voice dropping to something almost conspiratorial. "There are herbs, potions, that can mimic the effects of a mate bond, tricks that desperate women have used throughout history to trap powerful men." Ivy felt the words like poison seeping into her skin. She opened her mouth to defend herself, but Rowena spoke first. "Perhaps a test is in order." Rowena's voice was silky smooth. "If the bond is real, it will survive scrutiny. But if it is not—" She let the implication hang in the air. "There will be no test." Draven rose from his throne, his power rolling through the room in waves that made the lesser wolves cower. "I know what I feel. I know what the bond is, and I will not subject my mate to humiliation to satisfy the demands of a man who tried to sell her like cattle." For a moment, Ivy thought it was over. She thought Draven's authority would be enough. Then Marcus played his final card. "Very well," he said calmly. "If you will not see reason, then perhaps war is the only answer. My 50 warriors against your forces. Blood will spill, lives will be lost, all for one worthless Omega." He shrugged. "Or you could simply return what is mine, and we can avoid the unpleasantness entirely." Ivy saw it then, the flicker of hesitation in Draven's eyes. Not doubt about her, she realized, but doubt about the cost. How many of his people would die to protect her? How many families would be destroyed? She was one woman, branded and broken, and he was a king responsible for thousands. The answer came to her with terrible clarity. She could not let him sacrifice his people for her. Draven. Her voice came out steady, though her heart was shattering. May I speak with you privately? He turned to her, confusion creasing his brow, but he nodded. They retreated to a small antechamber, leaving Marcus and Rowena waiting in the hall. The moment the door closed, Ivy spoke before she could lose her nerve. You cannot go to war for me. I will do whatever is necessary to protect you. And how many will die? She stepped closer, forcing herself to meet his eyes. How many mothers will lose sons? How many children will lose fathers? For me, a woman you have known for barely a month? You are my mate, and they are your people. Tears spilled down her cheeks, hot and bitter. I will not be the cause of their deaths. I cannot live with that weight. Draven's expression crumbled, the mask of the king falling away to reveal the man beneath, raw, desperate, terrified. What are you saying? I am saying that I will go with him. The words tore her apart, but she forced them out anyway. I will return to the Southern Pack and face whatever judgment Marcus demands. And you will let me, because it is the right thing to do. No, the word was almost a growl, I will not lose you. You never had me. The lie burned her throat like acid. Not really. We had a few weeks of pretending, but this was never going to work. I was a fantasy, Draven, a distraction, and now it is time for both of us to wake up. She turned and walked back into the great hall before he could stop her. She walked to Marcus Marsh and stood before him, her head held high despite the tears streaming down her face. I will go with you, she said. Willingly. There is no need for war. Marcus's smile was triumphant, Rowena's was satisfied, and behind her, Ivy heard the sound that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Draven's roar of anguish as the woman he loved surrendered herself to save his kingdom. They chained her like an animal. Iron shackles bit into Ivy's wrists as Marcus's warriors dragged her through the Southern Pack's territory. The brand on her arm throbbed beneath the leather cuff, a reminder of everything she had escaped and everything she was returning to. The journey took 2 days, and they gave her barely enough food or water to survive. By the time the familiar timber walls of her former pack came into view, she could barely stand. Caden was waiting for her at the gates. The burns she had given him had healed into ugly, mottled scars that twisted the left side of his face. His eyes, once handsome, now filled with hatred, fixed on her with a hunger that made her skin crawl. Welcome home, little Omega. His voice was a rasp, damaged by the same fire that had marked his flesh. I have been counting the days until I could see you again. They threw her into a cell beneath the pack house, a dark and damp hole that smelled of mold and despair. Ivy curled into the corner, her body aching, her heart shattered. She had done the right thing. She had saved Draven's people from war. But the mate bond in her chest screamed with agony, stretching thin across the miles that separated them, and she wondered if the pain would kill her before Caden got the chance. She lost track of time in the darkness. Hours passed, maybe days. Caden visited twice, standing outside her cell and describing in vivid detail what he planned to do to her once his father gave permission. Ivy did not respond. She had retreated somewhere deep inside herself, a place where his words could not reach her. On what she thought was the third night, she heard the screaming begin. It started at the edges of the compound, distant shouts, the clash of steel, the unmistakable sounds of battle. Ivy pressed herself against the bars of her cell, straining to see anything in the darkness. The screaming grew louder, closer, punctuated by howls that made her blood sing with recognition. Wolves, an army of wolves, and at their head, a howl she would know anywhere. Draven. The door to the dungeon exploded inward, torn from its hinges by a force that should have been impossible. Moonlight spilled through the opening, silhouetting a figure that made Ivy's heart stop. He was covered in blood, his clothes torn, his smoke-colored eyes blazing with a fury that was barely human. Behind him, the sounds of battle raged on, but he did not seem to care. He strode toward her cell, ripped the iron door off its frame like it was made of paper, and dropped to his knees before her. Ivy. Her name was a broken sound on his lips. I am here. I am so sorry. I should never have let you walk out of that hall. Tears streamed down her face as she reached for him. I told you to let me go. I told you. You lied. His hands cupped her face, gentle despite the violence that still radiated from every line of his body. I know why you did it. You were trying to protect my people, trying to save me from an impossible choice. But you forgot something important. He pressed his forehead against hers. You are my people, Ivy. You are my choice, and no kingdom, no war, no threat is worth losing you. How did you? Rowena. His jaw tightened. She thought she had won. She came to me the night you left, offering herself as a consolation, told me I should forget about the branded Omega and accept a proper mate. Something dark flickered in his eyes. She made the mistake of admitting that she and Marcus had planned this together, that the whole confrontation was staged to drive you away and clear the path for her to become queen. Ivy's breath caught. They were working together. For months, apparently. Rowena wanted my throne. Marcus wanted to punish you for defying his son. They thought they could use my honor against me, force me to choose between you and my kingdom. Draven's smile was savage. They underestimated how far I would go to get you back. Footsteps thundered down the stairs, and Ivy tensed. But it was Draven's warriors who appeared, not enemies. They formed a protective circle around their king and his mate, their expressions grim but triumphant. The compound is secured, Your Majesty, one of them reported. Alpha Marsh has been captured, his son as well. Draven rose, pulling Ivy to her feet with him. Her legs trembled, weak from days of captivity, but his arm around her waist held her steady. And Rowena? He asked. Fled during the battle. We are tracking her now. Draven nodded, then looked down at Ivy with an expression that made her heart ache. Can you walk? I think so. Good. Because there is something I need to do, and I want you beside me when I do it. He led her up from the dungeon, through corridors she remembered scrubbing on her hands and knees, out into a courtyard now filled with conquered warriors and captured leaders. Marcus Marsh knelt in chains at the center, his face bloody and his eyes burning with impotent rage. Beside him, similarly bound, was Caden, his scarred face twisted with fear for the first time since Ivy had known him. Draven stopped before them, his arm still wrapped protectively around Ivy's waist. Alpha Marcus Marsh, he said, his voice carrying across the silent courtyard. You conspired with a traitor to abduct my mate. You held her prisoner, allowed your son to threaten her, and would have let her die in your dungeons. He paused, letting the words sink in. For these crimes, I sentence you and your heir to death. Marcus snarled. You cannot. I am the Alpha King. Draven's voice was ice. I can do whatever I wish. He looked at Ivy then, his expression softening despite the violence of the moment. Unless you would prefer a different fate for them, this is your justice as much as mine. Ivy looked at the men who had tormented her, who had branded her, who had tried to destroy everything she loved. She thought about mercy. She thought about vengeance. And then she thought about all the other wolves who might suffer if men like this were allowed to live. Justice, she said quietly. Let it be justice. Draven nodded, and the sentence was carried out before the sun rose. They returned to Ashford Keep as the first snow of winter began to fall. Ivy slept for most of the journey, exhaustion and relief pulling her into a darkness that held no dreams. When she woke, she was in her own chambers again, wrapped in soft blankets, with Draven sitting vigil in a chair beside her bed. He looked like he had not slept in days, dark circles beneath his smoke-colored eyes, his jaw shadowed with stubble. But when he saw her stir, his entire face transformed with relief. "You are awake." He reached for her hand, his fingers wrapping around hers like he was afraid she might disappear. "How do you feel?" "Like I was dragged behind a horse for 2 days and then thrown in a dungeon." Ivy managed a weak smile. "So, better than expected." Draven did not smile back. Instead, he slid from the chair to his knees beside her bed, still clutching her hand, his expression raw with emotion. "I failed you," he said. "I stood in that hall and let you walk away. I let you sacrifice yourself because I was too proud to find another solution, too blind to see what Rowena and Marcus were planning." His voice cracked. "You could have died, Ivy. You could have died, and the last words you spoke to me were lies designed to make me let you go." Ivy's throat tightened. "I was trying to protect you." "I know, and that makes it worse." He pressed his forehead against their joined hands. "You should never have to protect me. I am supposed to be the one who keeps you safe, who shields you from the cruelty of the world. Instead, I let the world take you from me." "Draven, I am not finished." He looked up at her, and she saw tears glistening in his eyes. This king, this warrior, this man who had torn apart an entire pack to bring her home. "I have spent my whole life believing that strength meant standing alone, that needing someone was weakness, but you have shown me how wrong I was." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "You are the strongest person I have ever known, Ivy. You survived things that would have broken anyone else, and when you had the chance to save yourself, you chose to save my kingdom instead. I could not let your people die for me. And I could not let you die for them." He rose just enough to sit on the edge of the bed, cupping her face in his hands the way he always did when he wanted her full attention. "So here is what is going to happen. I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never have to make that choice again. I am going to love you so completely, so fiercely, that you will never doubt your place at my side. And I am going to beg you, on my knees, in front of the entire kingdom if necessary, to be my queen." Ivy's heart was pounding so hard she could barely breathe. "You do not need to beg." "Yes, I do." Draven reached into his coat and withdrew a ring, a band of silver set with a deep green stone the color of forest shadows. "Because you deserve to be begged for. You deserve to be fought for. You deserve every grand gesture I can think of and 1,000 more besides." He held the ring between them, his hands trembling slightly. "Ivy Thorn, you are my mate, my heart, my home. Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of our lives proving that you were never unwanted, that you were always exactly what I needed?" Tears spilled down her cheeks, but for the first time in longer than she could remember, they were tears of joy. She looked at this man who had found her on a road with nothing but a brand and a broken spirit, who had taught her to read and dance and trust again, who had torn apart her enemies and knelt before her like she was the one with all the power. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." Draven slid the ring onto her finger, and then he was kissing her, soft and desperate and full of promises. The mate bond blazed between them, brighter than it had ever been, sealing them together in a way that went beyond words or ceremonies. When they finally broke apart, Ivy laughed through her tears. "You realize the entire kingdom is going to talk about this. The Alpha King proposing to a branded exile in her sickbed." "Let them talk." Draven pressed another kiss to her forehead, her cheeks, the corner of her mouth. "I want them to know exactly how much you mean to me. I want every wolf in every territory to understand that you are mine and I am yours, and nothing will ever change that." Even if I never learn to be a proper queen? You already are a proper queen. His smile was the warmest thing she had ever seen. You just need everyone else to catch up. Ivy pulled him down beside her, and he went willingly, wrapping his arms around her and holding her close. They lay together in the soft morning light, the snow falling gently outside the window, the mate bond humming with contentment. She had been branded unwanted, cast out, left to die. And now she was loved beyond measure, by a king who would burn the world down for her and build it back up again with her name written in the stars. It was more than she had ever dared to dream, and it was only the beginning. The wedding took place on the first day of spring. Ivy stood before a mirror in her chambers, hardly recognizing the woman who stared back at her. Her gown was white silk embroidered with silver thread, fitted perfectly to her frame and trailing behind her in a river of fabric that seemed to go on forever. Her hair had been woven with tiny white flowers, and around her throat hung a delicate chain bearing a pendant, a wolf beneath a crown of stars, the symbol of the Ashford line, the symbol that now belonged to her. Mira, the young maid who had become something like a friend over the past months, finished adjusting her veil and stepped back with tears in her eyes. You look like a queen, my lady. I feel like I am dreaming, Ivy admitted. Like I might wake up any moment and find myself back in that cell. You will never see that cell again. Mira squeezed her hand. The king would tear apart the world before he let anyone hurt you. Ivy smiled because she knew it was true. The great hall was filled to bursting when she arrived. Every noble in the kingdom had come to witness the Alpha King marry his mate, the branded exile who had captured his heart. Some of them still whispered, still doubted, still wondered how a servant could possibly be worthy of their king. But their whispers did not touch her anymore. She had learned that her worth was not determined by the opinions of strangers. Draven waited for her at the altar, dressed in black and silver, his smoke-colored eyes bright with emotion. He watched her walk toward him like she was the sunrise after an endless night, like she was everything good and beautiful in the world made flesh. When she reached him, he took her hands in his, and she felt the mate bond sing with joy. You came, he murmured, so quietly only she could hear. Did you think I would not? I thought I might wake up and find this was all a dream. His smile was soft, vulnerable in a way he only ever showed her. I have been waiting my whole life for you, Ivy. I just did not know it until I found you. The ceremony passed in a blur of vows and blessings, of cheers and applause. When Draven finally kissed her, his queen, his wife, his mate in every way that mattered, the great hall erupted in celebration. Wolves howled their approval, nobles raised their glasses, and somewhere in the crowd, Ivy could have sworn she heard her mother's voice whispering that she was proud. Later, when the festivities had quieted and they stood alone on the balcony overlooking the kingdom, Ivy took Draven's hand and pressed it against her stomach. He went still, his eyes widening with dawning realization. "Ivy," he breathed, "are you—" The healers confirmed it this morning. Tears slipped down her cheeks, happy and overwhelmed and so full of love, she thought she might burst. We are going to have a child, Draven, a family. He dropped to his knees, this king who had learned to kneel only for her, and pressed his lips to her belly with a reverence that stole her breath. When he looked up, his eyes were shining with tears of his own. I do not deserve this, he said. I do not deserve you. Ivy cupped his face in her hands, the same way he had done for her so many times before. You deserve everything, and I am going to spend the rest of my life proving it to you. She pulled him to his feet and kissed him beneath the stars, the mate bond blazing between them like a promise that would never be broken. She had been banished for being unwanted. Now she was a queen, a wife, a mother-to-be. She was loved and cherished and home at last. And somewhere, in a castle filled with laughter and hope, a new story was just beginning. one that would be told for generations to come. The story of the branded Omega who became a queen, and the king who loved her exactly as she was.